All right, so we're back, and I wanted to go through. We talked a little about key vocab or sorry, not key vocab in the last one, but evaluation in the last one. So the next thing I want to talk about is not actually, I'm going to kind of go past key vocab for a moment because we actually did get to talk about that quite a bit in class, but I still will go into detail in another video about key vocab. But I want to jump down to questions. So we were talking about questions, and most of you all were able to identify what were some good questions versus some not so good questions. When it comes to getting maybe extending. But one of the things that I want to mention is just when we're reading and we're coming up with these questions that yes, the thick questions here will help you get that extending an inquiry, but it doesn't mean that you can't have other types of questions here. So if you take a moment and you look at my questions that I put here, my first question here that I was actually interested in as we're reading and I was thinking about it was, did the British maintain positive relations with any European country? So yes, that is an open question, or it is a closed question, and it's thin. Um, but it is something that I still would like to know. So I add it here. I'm not thinking about it in terms of, oh, this is something that's going to get me necessarily up to extending, but it is going to demonstrate to me that you are asking multiple questions um, as you're reading through and that you're thinking about what you're reading. So this is tying into, I'm going to jump over to the grade, not that grade book, this grade book. So this is tying into this particular standard right here. Ask thoughtful, relevant questions that guide and evolve throughout the process. But it's also going to eventually, not right now, but later on, tie into this second one. Gathers a varied and sufficient amount of evidence related to research questions. Okay, so in here, there is this idea that later on, when you're doing these, when you're coming up with these questions, these might be some of the questions that when you read and study about a colony on your own, turn into the questions that you end up wanting to research, right? So it might not be on this particular article, but on a different article, you're like, this is the question that I kind of think about, and then it starts to develop. And that could be something where my question of did the British maintain positive relations with any European country might end up turning into something a bit more complex and something that I research, like um, how did positive relations between Britain and France, let's just say, affect which countries Britain went for and which countries France went for? I'm not saying that's necessarily something that's in our reading or is actually historically accurate. It's just an idea. It's this evolving process. So something that is a thin, closed question can eventually evolve, like you did on your QFTs, into something more complex. But you can have that blend. So I don't want to just have you thinking, oh, the only questions I can put over here are the ones that are really complex and are going to get me that extending. It's really any questions that you have, it's just the extending or the inquiry, getting that extending on some of those questions, and I keep clicking on the wrong one there, getting that extending on this standard are going to be those open, thick questions, right? So that's just something that I wanted to point out. And as you're reading, you should be inserting these questions and getting more of them as you're going along. Um, and one more reminder, and then I'll end this video, is we did talk about not having those what if questions. So you shouldn't have any hypothetical questions as your questions in here. And this is one of those ones that I just would prefer you, excuse me, that you didn't put into your question area. because they might distract you later on where you start thinking, oh, I got to do, oh, this is a question that I could use, and it really is a what if question. So you really want to focus on the questions over here, being ones that you could do either research or you could look up or you could think about and actually have an answer, not something hypothetical where it would be mostly guesswork rather than a direct answer. So that is a little bit of more explanation and detail on thinking about questions and how it ties into the standard, and the purpose of them later on is to help guide you on going deeper into research. So that's the multiple parts that we're thinking about when we do those questions.